Welcome to the Read, Talk, Grow podcast, where we explore women's health topics through books. In the same way that books can transport us to a different time, place, or culture, Read, Talk, Grow demonstrates how books can also give a new appreciation for health experiences and provide a platform from which women's health can be discussed. At Read, Talk, Grow, we use books to learn about health conditions in the hopes that we can all lead happier, healthier lives. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Millstine. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, where I practice women's health, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. I am always reading and I love discussing books with my patients, my professional colleagues, and now with you. Today, we are talking about the incredibly pervasive topic for women, burnout. I'm so excited about my two guests. My first guest is Amelia Nagoski, D.M.A, which stands for Doctorate of Musical Arts. She says that means most of her job is running around, waving her arms, and making funny noises, generally doing whatever it takes to help singers get in touch with their internal experience. She's the co-author with her sister Emily of the New York Times bestselling book, Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, as well as the Burnout Workbook. She lives in New England with her husband, one cat, and two rescue dogs. Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
My second guest is Dr. Cynthia Stonnington, who's a professor of psychiatry and the previous chair of psychiatry and psychology at Mayo Clinic in Arizona. She's also the associate medical director of the Office of Joy and Wellbeing. She completed medical school at Mayo Medical School in Rochester, Minnesota, and residency training in psychiatry at Stanford University Medical Center. She's written more than 60 academic articles, including several on well-being and peer support. She's the co-editor of the academic book, Burnout in Women Physicians: Prevention, Treatment, and Management, published by Springer in 2020. Dr. Stonnington, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Denise. Glad to be here.
So this is an incredibly important topic. I've been meaning to read your book, Amelia, for some time, and I had it on my holds at the library. When I got it and was able to borrow it, I saw there were 17 people behind me waiting to borrow it as well. And before I even cracked it open, I told our producer, we need to get them on the show. This book is resonating. Is that what you're finding?
I have talked to a lot of people since the book came out, and it seems like people are finding both new ways of thinking about health and, maintenance of their own well-being, as well as just reinforcing things that they always thought or believed or suspected were true, but that have been denied to them by the wider kind of social message. So yeah, in those two ways, people have told us that they definitely understand and feel seen and heard in the book.
And Cynthia, this topic is not new to you as well. You have seen colleagues, your patients, I'm sure your friends and family dealing with burnout for a long time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that obviously, as you know, I got started in this work back when we stumbled across the idea of doing this authentic connections group, physician moms and advanced practice provider moms. And oh my gosh, did my eyes get opened, and it just felt like there is so much work to do, and there's so much to know, and so much that we need to respond to. So absolutely. When I read your book, or listened to your book, I should say, which I loved, just really resonated. And I particularly loved that you grounded it in evolutionary biology, because that's a topic near and dear to my heart. So but we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
So burnout, I think, can be confusing, and we're going to dive into the why, the what can women do about it, the how to recognize. But let's start where the book starts, which is with stress. So the stress cycle, stress versus stressor. Amelia, there's some great analogies in the book. Do you want to offer some insight into that?
Sure. This is an important thing that I needed to learn. Our editors and agents, as they started to read what we were writing, all agreed that this needed to be chapter 1. And in fact, the idea of the stress cycle is in the subtitle of the book, because this is such a foundational, fundamental idea that if you are burned out, if you are having trouble managing your stress, step 1 of the thing you need to do is separate in your understanding the thing that is causing your stress from stress itself. And I needed to learn that stress was not like an idea or a concept or some kind of thing that existed just as a untouchable ethereal. No, stress is a cycle that happens in your body. It has a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's made up of like neurochemicals, hormones, and electrical signals that accomplish tasks and change just about every system in your body. Whereas the thing that causes that stress, that initiates the stress response cycle, exists nowadays independent of the stress itself that happens in your body, which is really great news, because it means that just because that thing that causes your stress is ongoing, you can still start to feel better and manage the stress in your body. I don't know how long you want me to talk about this, because I could legit talk about it for the whole hour. So let me know how big I should go.
No, I think that was a great introduction to distinguishing between stress, the stressor, and then recognizing the stress cycle. Cynthia, talk a little bit about completing that stress cycle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really love the terminology. I hadn't heard it said that way actually before I listened to your book. And I think it is so important because that is what happens. During, I think, second wave feminism, we tended to think that women really going for doing it all, right? You can be the perfect mom, you can be the perfect wife, you can be the world-class whatever, we can do it all. And there was that that was what was fed us, I think, and less awareness of of what that actually meant to our bodies and the stress cycle. And so I think there has been this sense, this idea that you just sort of suck it up, you keep going. And obviously, when you do that, you're not fully processing all of those stress responses that are just completely 100% normal under various circumstances, but sometimes are triggered in maybe even false alarms based on evolution and the way that we have had to survive, and then sometimes are perpetuated by a lot of perhaps even useless emotions. So emotions are great, but sometimes they're useful for the situation, and other times they're not. And so piling all of that on, if you don't take that time to rest and recharge or recognize or tune in, then that has a huge wear and tear effect on one's body. And I also practice as a psychiatrist and in consultation liaison, where I'm seeing people who are coming to the Mayo Clinic for a variety of medical problems and physical problems. And a lot of that really sometimes relates to not recognizing how to complete that stress cycle and recognizing the impact that all of this has on our body, and legitimately so. It's not like made up. It's a real legit thing. And so teaching people like you have done in this book, Amelia, is such an important lesson, to be able to listen to your body, to take that time and to have that compassion for yourself so you can let that process and recognize when something's useful, when it's not, et cetera.
Yeah, you just named 4 things that I absolutely needed to know when I was burnt out. 1, to recognize that emotions are real, that stress is a thing that actually happens. And having compassion, that's chapter 8. I forget what the other 2 things are because I started talking and then I let them go. But yes, everything you just said was exactly the stuff that, in 2011, when I was in the hospital with stress-induced illness, those are the exact things that I needed to learn. And it ended up being the evidence-based, of course, as you know, the evidence-based approach to managing stress that people don't talk about as much because they're too busy reinforcing the barriers to wellness, which are telling, listen to your body. That was definitely one of them, because we're all taught so often that the things that are wrong with us are going to be identified by other people, that we need to go into a professional medical system in order to find out what's broken inside us. And when in fact, if we are given permission to listen to our own bodies, and then once we're given permission, recognize that, okay, this takes practice. Learning to do that opens up so many possibilities for understanding that you might not be diseased. You might just be striving for a goal that's been set by an outside world that believes you are expendable like a tube of toothpaste. And when you're trying
Right.
to strive for those goals, you have to learn to let go of that and listen to your own body and find out what its goals and needs are, and not try to cross the bridge between who you are and who the world expects you to be. There's no bridge, it's just a chasm.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to recognize that we have limits and that we have to sort of say, okay, wait a minute, I may have bitten off more than I can chew. I have to just sort of give myself a little bit of time.
Yeah, and
Although,
to feel like that's not failure.
yes, exactly.
That's success.
Exactly. That is success. The success is noticing that and taking that time. And it can be a really short amount of time, right? If you do it in little bites, right?
Yeah, as long as you know you have permission to use resources and time and sleep and food for yourself, and you're not bogged down by guilt by the fact that you dared to have a full night's sleep while
Yes.
other people could have benefited from you and your work and your labor and your time and your body in that space. Yeah.
What I like about what both of you are saying is, Cynthia, you're talking about, the perfect woman, the woman who can have it all, this idea that we were sold through feminism that we could do everything in all parts of our lives and sort of be super women. And then Amelia, in your book, you name this the human giver syndrome, that we are functioning because, and I'll paraphrase, of course, but that our life would have meaning if we were just pretty, calm, happy, generous, and attentive to the needs of others. I thought this was brilliant to name it in this direction because I don't think most women feel like I'm trying to be perfect. I think they have been pulled into this desire to be the constant giver without recognizing how depleted that leaves them.
Yeah, and we adapted this idea from a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny by a moral philosopher named Kate Mann. And in it, she posits a world where there's two kinds of people. The human beings are the first type, where they have a moral obligation to be their humanity, to live it, to express it, to acquire whatever resources are necessary to do that. And the human givers, who have a moral obligation to give their time, their lives, their bodies, their humanity to the human beings. This is a cartoonish, like black and white, sort of exaggerated illustration, but in a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, do you think she means the women or the beings or the givers? It's the givers.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people's first response to this idea was, well, then everyone should get to be a being. But what if we made a world full of beings? Everyone would feel acquisitive and entitled, and we'd end up with the world that's a whole lot like the one we have now. Whereas if everyone were givers, surrounded only by givers, not by beings who feel entitled to what the givers have, that means that a giver who has given until they're running low on resources to keep themselves alive and healthy and well and happy, they're surrounded by other people who are also givers who will turn toward them and offer support and resources, reminding each other that we all deserve them just as we are.
I love that. I think that's great. And I think one of the things that I have found is that men would like to be kind of rid of that dichotomy as well. This idea that all men just want to be in control and in power and being able to. I think there's a lot of evidence that they've been screaming for a long time that let's have a more kinder place as well. Yet that's not socially acceptable. And I think what's exciting to me is that we're starting to see a little bit of a shift of men sort of stepping up and saying, I want to take parental leave. I want to be a part of the family. This is important to me. And there's been a little bit of a shift, I think. Definitely, we're not there yet, but there's a little bit of a shift in it being a bit more socially acceptable for men to do that.
A little bit of shift. And at the same time, there's backlash towards that shift, where there's also this like kind of far right conservative, very, I think they'd call it traditional or old fashioned sense of like men have to be manly and women have to be womanly. And they have a definition of what that means. And that the idea of violating that paradigm is not only gross, but like morally reprehensible. That if you are a man who dares to express and show tenderness to his own children, to say, I love you to his kids, and to read them to sleep at night, to bathe them and take them to the park and play with them, that kind of like lightness and gentility is wrong and bad for a man, which is, of course, scientifically untrue. Men are human beings who have access to all of the emotions that a woman would have, and someone who is non-binary. We all have emotions, and we're all real, full human beings, and not to give a man the opportunity to express that kind of tenderness and excitement. I'll never forget one year I was having my choir sing a duet from La Boheme, where the romantic lead male sings about how passionately in love he is and how he's just like trembling within from desire and ardent whatever. And a bass in my choir went, guys don't feel like that. And I was like, oh, sweetie, I'm so excited for you to discover that they can. Like, I can't wait for the day when you find out, oh my God, I can feel this thing I never thought was possible for me. It's one of the beauties of working with art is I get to show people potential things that other people know that they might not know yet. Anyway, the idea that men have access to things that they didn't used to have access to. And if we can like keep that backlash to a minimum and really make it, and this is why we say in the book that the cure for burnout is not self-care, it's all of us caring for each other. So when we can make this gradual change of, oh yes, there's an increasing acceptance and tolerance for men who father and for women who are breadwinners. And gradually, hopefully, it'll turn into like a non-binary. We don't expect someone's genitalia to determine their social role. Like that's the dream, right? But we can only work slowly toward that progress. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes. Our kids might start to see progress, and their kids could potentially see real change.
I think another aspect of these roles is invisibility. So much of the work that is traditionally carried by women or people who are in that human giver syndrome is work that goes unrecognized and even unseen. Dinner doesn't make itself. The laundry doesn't, even though we're lucky enough to live in an era where there is a washing machine, it doesn't get, cleaned and folded on its own. But even things like planning social interactions for your family or your work group, I think is a lot of the invisible work that tends to be done by the giver.
So that's really important. I mean, of course, there's been a lot of attention and research about that, showing that, in fact, women do tend to do that regardless of how high they are on the hierarchical spectrum, that they still take on the burden of that, and that it isn't always recognized. I mean, that's one of the things that we're really working on in the Office of Joy and Wellbeing, is to really increase that sense of recognition for things that aren't normally measured or celebrated, and to really try to bring that forward. I have this other author also, this Fair Play. Have you read that? That's all about doing that, about putting on the table what it is that, in a couple, what you're doing. Not to say it has to be equal, but that it all gets noted. And in doing so, you have a better sort of appreciation, understanding of each other, and making space for what's necessary.
That's a fantastic idea, because I know we all believe, and we all do, work so hard and as much as we can. And it's really easy to default to, well, I'm the one doing everything. So that's great to have like a thing to like really see and even quantify. Here are the things that I do. And then you have to like reach in and be like, of how much value is this thing? And of, how much do we need? Whatever, XYZ. That's really
Right.
cool.
Yeah, the whole point of that is exactly that. You start to re-examine, well, maybe I can let go of that one. Or maybe I don't be so insistent it has to be done exactly perfectly. Or maybe I can just back off. And, so you start to reassess and reassign once you kind of put it all on the table and then talk about it together.
That's awesome. I get asked so many times, well, I have all this stuff on my to-do list, and, my partner just won't help me with these things. And my first question is then, who put that stuff in your to-do list? Did you put it there because you really want it, or did Instagram put it there because it wants you to buy more stuff or like suck your eyeballs back to more things. And in most cases, people are like, yeah, there's stuff that's on there that I don't care about as much as I've been told I should.
I love that section of the book where the husband was forced in now to do some of these things. Can you talk a little bit more about that section? There's a lot of layers there.
Throughout the book, we have these two stories going on of Julie and Sophie, who are women who lead very different lives. But in each chapter, we see how the content of that chapter would influence their lives. And these stories are made up of scenes from real stories from a wide variety of sources. We just compacted them down to two characters who we named Sophie and Julie. In the book, Julie is a teacher and she has an episode of severe digestive situation. She goes to the emergency room and she finds out she needs to like change a lot of things about her lifestyle in order to make her digestive system work. And it means she needs to start doing a lot less. And, you know, she's a mom and she's having trouble getting along with her husband. And her husband suddenly like steps up and does the things that she needs him to do so that she can like lay in bed and rest for a day or catch up on other things. And he comes home and he's like, that's so much harder. And he had no idea just how much she had been doing until she's like, this is all your job now. And it's this kind of eye-opening, inspiring moment of seeing and understanding that shifts the way they view what their roles are in their relationship, which is that's how it's got to work. You got to have a partner who's willing to see that what you do is of value and that it is not just easy for you, no matter how easy you make it look. It has its physical toll.
And the other thing that happened, I thought, which was interesting, was that Julie recognized that she had sort of felt like she was supposed to be in control of everything and doing everything. And it was supposed to be done a certain way and had a certain standard. And she had to be willing to let go of that and to let go of it just has to be good enough. It doesn't have to be like, you know, where she was.
Yeah, that's the final twist in the story is her husband's name is Jeremy and he's doing the things but not the right way, which is to say not her way. And the phrase he uses is, if you want something done your way, you have to do it yourself because your way is not necessarily the only way. And I'm just going to say that I was recently diagnosed with autism and it opened my eyes as to like why my way seemed like the best way. And I was like, oh, that could be a reason. It's not just like a, you know, neurodivergent thing that people fixate on exactly the only way that a thing can be done. A lot of us are just in habits of this is how it's always been done. Therefore, that's how we must always do it. And making that change is various degrees of difficult, but difficult for everyone to accept. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you don't have to.
Well, and sometimes I think it just takes being open to considering that, you know, maybe we believe that's the right way. And it's not that we're rigid. It's just that we've always thought that to be true. And it's not until you back off and say, is it okay that my bookshelf is a lot messier than Cynthia's bookshelf, which looks very well put together right behind her there? And mine has books going all different directions and, you know, double stacked. Is that okay? You know, and it might be okay for me and one way might be okay for the next person. Let's talk a little bit about headwinds, because I think this is really important, especially in this day and age. When we are pushing against something, at least in the book, you say, we notice that we're trying harder. But when we have tailwinds, when we have people behind us supporting us or making the process easier, we don't necessarily notice that. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this was actually, I taught this book for a semester to my undergrads, and there were 2 masculine students in the class, and the other like 18 all identified as some feminine gender. And when we got to this chapter, it's chapter 4 about the patriarchy, and there's this section about the headwinds, tailwinds, asymmetry that says that we really notice when we have to work harder because there's headwinds pushing us back as we try to drive forward. And we don't really notice when we have tailwinds of something behind us, pushing us forward and helping us. And that means that, you know, we're constantly kind of overestimating how much effort that we have to face and underestimating the things that have provided us support and benefit. And I asked them at the end of each chapter, name one important thing you learned in this chapter. Both of the masculine students said it was the headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry, the noticing that, and evolutionarily, it makes sense, right? You notice and pay attention when a thing is hard because clearly this is where learning has to happen. This is where change and growth has to happen. And therefore you pay more attention to it and you are able to proceed into more difficult circumstances. Whereas why would you have to notice all the things that help you? Like, that's just there. You don't have to turn toward that and be like, oh, I need to cultivate that some more. It's already there. So it makes sense that you don't notice the tailwinds, but it really stood out to me that it was the two masculine students in the class who were like, oh yeah, I really never noticed all the tailwinds. And I really overestimated all those headwinds.
Can you say more about what it was that you think that was what resonated with masculine as opposed to the more feminine?
Yeah. They did not specify, but because of the context of that chapter, it's a book that's written for and about women because it was written for and about me. We wrote the book that I needed. So it addresses some people on the feminine side of the gender, certainly non-binary folks also. And I think that the ideas in that chapter, we lay out statistics and numbers and history to describe exactly how the oppression of women is manifest in the, white supremacist, cis heteronormative, exploitative, late capitalist patriarchy. Like, what exactly does it look like to be a woman in that system? I think in the context of that, where they've just read about, relationship violence and harassment and, being overlooked at work for promotions and other kinds of prejudices and the danger that women face every day, that in the context of having read all about that, just a list of historical facts and statistics, and then to be like, and now here's why it's hard sometimes to remember that you have privilege versus you live in an oppressive system. I think it's because it came in that context.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think the things that we talk about in specific to women physicians is that the healthcare environment grew up in a system in which pretty much it was mostly men who were the physicians who had wives at home taking care of all of the family, domestic responsibilities, et cetera, so that they could really focus in on their work and not have to worry about anything else. And so that's the system we're assuming that, when you go to work, you don't have to really think about anything else. And so it's really been interesting as we've had now 50% of medical students are women, and we've begun to have a little change in the way we're thinking about the importance of well-being and the rise of burnout and all of those things that are happening. We've had to really reimagine that system and sort of think, well, of course, that isn't the way it is now. We don't all have wives at home taking care of all of these things. And so what are we going to do about it?
It's not just in medicine. That's a great point, that what needs to happen is that the systems that are causing burnout need to change. It's not that the people who are in the systems can't handle it and they're too wimpy and, the tough survive. And if you can't hack it, then you don't deserve to be here, which is a pervasive message for a long, long time. But the truth is that the things that are being asked of students these days is unreasonable. We just don't live in a world, as you're saying, where that is how it works. So the system needs to change, not to keep on as it is, demanding unreasonable things from the student population. Otherwise, people are not going to finish the programs and they're not going to go into this field. They're going to feel like they've been tortured and hazed. And that's how I felt coming out of my graduate degree. It's not just medicine, it's higher ed in general, has this kind of hazing, perpetuating the same old garbage system, just thinking that, well, this is the way it is, so this is the way it should be. It's so wonderful that you're recognizing, you're in a position to recognize and then create change in a system that could benefit not just women students, but everybody.
Everybody. No, I really think that's important. Think about how we are even making more tailwinds, I guess, for men as well as women, right, in doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. When I was in graduate school, actually, it remains true. I was the only woman in the conducting program, and I'm the only woman ever to complete the doctorate in conducting from that school. There are other students who've graduated since I finished, and they're all men. And I was surrounded by men. Conducting is completely male dominated. I was also in the doctoral program of the whole PhD, D.M.A, all of the degrees they offered in the music department. I was the only married person. There were men who were married, and their wives did other jobs and took care of the house. And it was exactly like you were describing, where they are married, and that means that their lives are easier and they get to focus exclusively on their work. And I was married and a stepmother and commuting, and it wasn't the same to be a wife in graduate school as it was to be a husband in graduate school.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think another reason your book, Cynthia, is so important for physicians is that we go into a caring and a giving profession. So you already have these givers who are professionals and high achievers. And while this is not unique to women physicians, I think it is pervasive among women physicians. So I myself am so grateful that you put the book into the world. I want to change gears a little bit because I would suspect that most readers who pick up Burnout don't think that it's going to dive into weight and body acceptance as much as it does.
Yeah, it's a whole chapter.
Yet it's a whole chapter, but it's a whole paradigm shift, which goes to, what drives us and the pressures that we put on ourselves. But one of your statements in there is that being thin is not about female beauty. It's about female obedience.
Yep.
And you talk about movements such as health at every size and shifting to the new hot, which is a reframing of how beautiful people of every size are and can be. Talk a bit about that whole piece of the work.
This comes primarily from a book by Lindo Bacon called Health at Every Size. Well, the first half of the book is the science of eating and digestion and metabolism, which was very interesting science information that did not stick in my head real well. But the second half is their study, the research that they did, comparing health interventions with people of size, fat people, depending on how they want to identify. And in the control group, they got the traditional, exercise and diet and striving to have a new weight loss goal to lose a certain amount of weight. And in the other experimental group, they were not given the goal to lose any weight. They were just taught about sort of good health behavior, what kind of foods are good for you, is physical activity good for you, and just to be neutral about the size and shape of their body and not to evaluate their health by the way their body appears, which I had been taught to evaluate my health by the way my body appears. I thought that that was correct. It turns out in this research that the people who got healthier, whose actual metrics, not weight, but blood pressure, resting heart rate, and also the amount of stress they experience and how they feel about the experience, it was a much better outcome for the group who did not have a weight loss goal, when they were just being encouraged to do behaviors that are healthy and not ending up just measuring their health by how much effect gravity has on their frame. That's changed everything about how I think about my body and my health. And it's not just about fat necessarily. The idea can also be extended to color and the placement and quantity and texture of hair on your body, about the presence of scars. Do we feel ashamed of our bodily differences that happen because we've been wounded in our lives, or because how dare we have a baby and still have stretch marks? Oh my God, that's so The new hotness game comes out of that, where it happened one day that I was in a kind of a fancy boutique buying a gown for a performance I had coming up. And at the time I was a 14, 16, kind of on the edge between standard sizes and plus sizes. It's hard to shop for. So I'm trying on the largest size dress they got in this little boutique. And I take a picture of myself in the mirror and I was like, I'm the new hotness. Comes from the Men in Black movie with Will Smith. He's like, I am the new hotness, and tells Tommy Lee Jones that he's old and busted, but he's the new hotness. So I took this picture and I texted it to Emily and I said, I'm the new hotness. And she was like, yes, you are. Like, I'm wearing the largest dress they have in this store, but I look great in it just as I am. Like, I don't have to be thin to look really, really awesome in this dress and to feel really awesome and valid and proud to stand in front of an audience in this dress. And then it turned into a thing that we did all the time. Like, we'd be going out for a meeting or for a lunch thing, take a picture, send it, I'm the new hotness. And just like restating that every time, it starts to, sort of like mantra work itself into your head, where you learn to look at yourself and not judge by the standard that's been imposed upon you by some external force, but by your own understanding that who you are is valid and acceptable, not just failing to be healthy the way that the world has taught you that you're supposed to see it, but also, failing to be moral. We place this moral judgment on people who don't conform to the socially constructed ideal. We tell them not only that they're unhealthy, but that they're like a menace to society, that they're a terrible role model for children. It's turns out the stigma is more dangerous to our well-being than the fat on our body is.
I completely get that. And that chapter I agree, was so liberating and so really was helpful to me as well. I think it was just beautifully written, and it makes so much sense when you think about it, exactly what you just said, because can you imagine how many times you're triggering your stress response every time you look at your body and you have those judgments? Every single time. That's like constant, and that's a constant stressor. Of course, that's going to increase. It's going to make you fatter, right, in a way, but it also is going to make you feel
not
really,
that would necessarily be inherently evil if you get fatter. Not that it's necessarily dangerous to get fatter, but yes, it could increase your stress, and it might make things more difficult for you in
the point being
self-reinforcing cycle.
Exactly. It's like if your goal is to not be fat for whatever reason, and you are doing that to yourself, you're going to be it's like when people try really hard and get anxious about going to sleep, right? Sleep is a natural thing. And they just like, I have to sleep. Well, that's how we have to learn not to try to go to sleep.
The number one cause of insomnia. Right? Yeah. The number one cause of insomnia is anxiety about not sleeping.
Exactly.
It's a self-reinforcing thing. Yeah. And once you let go of like, oh, this is the goal. Nope. Turns out the goal is something bigger, something larger. It's about listening to your own body and letting it tell you what it needs.
Exactly.
I don't want to spoil the book for people who are going to go out and read the whole thing, and they should, but I do want to wrap up with the end, because I do think it's really well aligned with Cynthia's academic work that she started to talk about. In the book, it's the bubble ingredients, the bubble of love, the trust, the trust, the connected knowing, the space to recharge. Cynthia, can you just tell us briefly about how important you found that to be in some of your academic projects?
Connection is absolutely, 100%, probably if you had to pick one thing that is probably the most important in terms of resilience, in terms of stress reduction, in terms of thriving, it's being able to have human connections and to have connections in which you feel very psychologically safe as well. But connections, boy, I could go on and on. There's so many biological reasons for that and evolutionary reasons for that, but it is such a key piece. A lot of the studies that I've been involved in and that I've read have really reinforced that notion that when you create environments that allow for support, connection, peer support, shared stories, a sense of universality and acknowledgement, that makes a huge difference in our ability to thrive, and really is a great buffer for preventing or minimizing burnout or recovering from burnout, let's say. All of those things.
When Emily and I started doing the research to take us to the next step in writing the book, we thought we were going to be writing like a selfie-helpy type book, like a things you can do to feel better. And it turned out overwhelmingly, the research, as you're saying, is that connection, that shared understanding and compassion among humans is the thing that it doesn't necessarily have to be other humans. It can be with a loving divine presence. It can be with your own inner child. It can be with your pets. It can be with nature itself. But if you feel a connection, and especially connection with other humans, that connection is like the foundation. That's why we ended up saying over and over in the book that the cure for burnout's not self-care. It's all of us caring for each other, because yes, as you're saying, connection is the thing. If it's the most powerful means of completing the stress response cycle and making yourself feel protected from outside forces who provide goals that are unachievable, because those people you're connected to will remind you that you don't have to achieve that goal, that who you are is already enough. And there's nothing that fights burnout more than that. And yeah, we call it the bubble of love in the book.
I love it. As you point out, loneliness is more toxic than cigarette smoking. And that's been a big charge, of course, of our Surgeon General, to really talk about loneliness and combating it. I love the study, that very long longitudinal study that started at Harvard, with looking at some of the elements that were important for health and longevity and flourishing. And the one thing that they came up with, and this is men again, so it's not just women, was whether or not they had social connections. That was the thing. That was the thing that stood out about everything. So it really is key and is, again, a big pillar of what we're trying to do in our Office of Joy and Wellbeing, is to create those connections and make it easy for that to happen, because it's so powerful.
That's so great to have a study that focuses on the result on men, because connection is stigmatized as being kind of weak and feminine, that you're supposed to be autonomous and independent, and that's who the heroes are. But
Right.
In reality, no, you're not going to be your fullest self. Your most thriving humanity cannot be expressed unless it is in connection with a community. So to have hard science that men can show their boss and say, no, like, it's not weakness for me to work in a team. It is, in fact, better for all of us. That stigma is so much of a barrier.
This has been such an amazing conversation, and I hope that it's inspiring our listeners and people watching the podcast to go out and read Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Maybe buddy read it with one of your friends, because it would be a great one to discuss, or with your book club, for example. It's really been my honor to talk to both of you who are burnout experts and who are really changing the paradigm and giving us so much hope to be even healthier. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us to talk books and health today on Read, Talk, Grow. To continue the conversation and send comments, visit the show notes or email us at readtalkgrow@mayo.edu. Read, Talk, Grow is a production of Mayo Clinic Press. Our producer is Lisa Speckhard-Pask, and our recording engineer is Rick Andreessen. The podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed to replace a physician's medical assessment and judgment. Information presented is not intended as medical advice. Please contact a healthcare professional for medical assistance with specific questions pertaining to your own health if needed. Keep reading, everyone.